Okay, we're continuing in the 1600s with the history of science from the book Hidden History of Science by Peter Rogers. And this gentleman is John Wallis, and he lived from 1616 to 1703. He's one of the co-inventors of calculus, along with Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz. And kind of the reason for showing you all these guys is you can see that there's a clear continuity of history for the development of science in Christian Europe. It's just a fact. Here's Robert Hooke. He lived from 1635 to 1703, and he's one of the early users of the microscope, and he discovered the concept of a cell. He was a rival with Isaac Newton in the Royal Society. They're always kind of bad-mouthing each other. Okay. Now here's a Yugoslavian guy, Joseph Bošković from Yugoslavia. He's another Jesuit priest. Like 35 craters on the moon are named after Jesuit priests. They did a lot of tremendously good work. And he came up with, important concepts in not just astronomy, but also atomic theory, okay? So there were lots of these guys. And the point as well is that these guys were all Christian. Many of them were actually priests, okay? The Christian religion is much, much more religious, much more scientific. It's where science comes from. That's why when people say, oh, is there a conflict between science and religion? I'm like, BS. Science comes from the Christians. And the other thing is the modern scientific method it does of experiment, hypothesis, experiment, analysis of results, and new experiment. Here's Blaise Pascal, lived in France in the 1600s. He was inventor of a prototype calculating machine or calculator or computer. He was involved in gambling and betting and figuring out the odds as well, and he then became a theologian, very devout Catholic, and he was author of the famous Pascal's Pensee, meaning his thoughts, and the Pascal's wager. And basically what he said is, it's a smart thing to bet on God, because if you bet on God and he doesn't exist, you got nothing to lose. But if you don't bet on him and he does exist, then you lose a lot. So it's actually very well written, Pascal's wager. I made a separate video about that. Okay, here's Antoine van Leeuwenhoek, and he's another one of the early users of the microscope. And he saw the first little things moving around under his microscope. He called them animalcules, and he is considered the father of microbiology. He was also the first person to see human capillaries. And he would write, and he was a Dutch Calvinist, but he would write about this for the Royal Scientific Society of London. That's where a lot of the early discoveries were presented. Okay, now this guy right here is Joachim Winkelmann, and he's very famous in Germany. He was I think I skipped a person to get to him. I don't think I meant to get to him. But anyways, he was very famous in Germany for finding some of the early remains of Greek sculptures, and he said to the Germans, the only way we can become great again is if we study the great ones of ancient Greece and Rome. And so his book, he became one of the most famous men in Germany and inspired a tremendous increase in the study of classicism, the ancient Greeks and Romans. Goethe loved this guy, and tons of people were heavily influenced by him. Look at Schopenhauer, look at Nietzsche, these German scholars, okay? So here I started with this guy, Leeuwenhoek, okay, and then I got Winkelmann. All right, now let's see who's next. Okay, here's Emanuel Swedenborg. Now, Emanuel Swedenborg was from Sweden, and he was a real scientist pioneer in understanding brain anatomy, very religious. He also did work in mineralogy, and he was a polymath type of all-around Renaissance genius guy. And in some ways, he ended up being like Blaise Pascal. As he got older, he was more and more interested in writing about religion. So that's Emanuel Swedenborg. And one of the points I'm making is being religious and being scientific go hand in hand. Because when more you study science, the more you're amazed at things and you believe in God more. What I've noticed is people in the so-called humanities or just literature or something are much more likely to be an atheist because they don't know anything. But when you start studying the complexity and the sophistication of human life, the life of a cell, you become religious because you realize it's just too much to have happened by chance. All right, now here's Lord Kames in a fancy red robe, a Scottish man. He's another one of these guys who developed a version on the cyclical theory of civilization. And this kind of reminds you of Giambattista Vico, of the paintings of, Thomas Cole, Voyage of Life and Consummation of Empire. And the gist of it being, a group starts out as nomadic pioneers, then they develop agriculture, and then they gradually develop, cities and have more leisure time, specialization, and higher levels of literature and that type of sophistication, and then they become decadent and their society collapses, and hopefully we're not in that phase right now. Okay. Scotland became very smart in the late 1600s into the 1700s with all these, because they emphasized teaching the Bible in the schools. That makes people smart. Young people should be studying religion in school. It makes them smart. It just does. I've seen that over and over again. Okay, he said the purpose of law was to compel others to leave property alone that was not theirs. Adam Smith, the other Scottish genius, he wrote the book called The Wealth of Nations about the development of capitalism, and the idea of the invisible hand of self-interest makes things better for everybody. If each man just pursues his own self-interest, you get a good, fair market. And they call him, some do, the father of capitalism, but capitalism was actually invented by the Roman Catholic Church because it had extended business-type communications between its peoples in the different countries of European Christendom, as well as its missionaries in other parts of the world, like South America, after 1500. Okay. So Adam Smith considered himself like a moral philosopher. If you would have asked him, what does he do? Okay, here's his big book, The Wealth of the Nations. Okay, that's the big one that everybody has to read in school. And some have called it the Summa of the Scottish Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment itself is a bogus term. Basically, these other scumbags like Gibbons and Voltaire and their other atheist cronies called the 1700s Enlightenment, like trying to say that they're enlightened. And then we call the Middle Ages the Dark Age, trying to say the Middle Ages were dark. But the reality is, the monks in the monasteries are doing great science for that time in their monasteries. And then all these blowhard atheists are a bunch of humanities type people like Gibbons from England and Voltaire from France, Rousseau from France, Diderot from France. Okay, they didn't do any science. The bullshit artists, they didn't do any science. They don't know anything about life on Earth. Okay, that'll be it for today. I hope you found it helpful.